This is Stu Epperson from the Truth Talk podcast, connecting current events, pop culture, and theology. And we're so grateful for you that you've chosen the Truth Podcast Network. It's about to start in just a few seconds. Enjoy it, and please share it around with all your friends. Thanks for listening, and thanks for choosing the Truth Podcast Network.
This is the Truth Network.
The heart of every man craves a great adventure, but life doesn't usually feel that way. Jesus speaks of narrow gates and wide roads, but the masculine journey is filled with many twists and turns. So how do we keep from losing heart while trying to find the good way when life feels more like a losing battle than something worth dying for? Grab your gear and come on a quest with your band of brothers who will serve as the guides in what we call the masculine journey. The Masculine Journey starts here now.
Welcome to Masculine Journey. We are very glad to have you with us this week, and I can't really say anything bad about Darren this week because he's here.
Well, you can still say it. I mean, you were thinking it. What's the difference?
Well, no, I was going to pick on Robbie because Robbie's not here.
Right, that's fine.
Yeah, that's usually how we work. You know, if you're around a group of guys and you really get to know them, you know that's how they really work on the inter.
This was going to be a better show, but because Robbie's not here, it's all his fault.
It is going to be his fault. Yeah, I think it was his topic. No, it was actually mine, I think, for last week. Last week we had one of your topics, and that's what I gave you a hard time about because you were with your wife, where it's where you should be.
Yes.
You know, on her birthday. But it was fear.
Yes.
The topic of fear, and it really kind of morphed into, as we went through the show, being afraid of mankind, being afraid of the human element, right? And then it got into the topic a little bit that we didn't have time to really spend on it, of what's contrasting that to the fear of the Lord. You know, because the Bible does say very clearly in several places, you know, to have a fear of the Lord, but what does that necessarily mean?
Yeah. And you know, where I was coming from on last week's show, which I was not a part of, except planning it to every jot and tittle, which you guys evidently did not follow my outline very well.
We missed a tittle or two.
I'm guessing you did. However, in my thoughts were that, you know, Satan's biggest tool is our fear.
Yeah.
I mean, when Peter talks about, you know, the enemy is roaring like a lion seeking to devour, that what does he use as his teeth? What does he use to devour people? Well, in that context, Peter says it's fear. It's clearly fear. And so he says, cast your fear on the Lord. So, well, what if I'm scared of God?
Right.
I mean, it makes it hard to cast my fear on God if I'm scared of him. And I grew up, you know, you and I kind of both grew up in a little bit of the same background where, I mean, God was kind of the sheriff God to me. I mean, he was sitting up there on his horse. He had a couple of Colt 45s on both sides, and I was right there on the fence, but I didn't know which side I was going to fall on. And I didn't know, you know, I was just pretty sure it was always going to be wrong, and God was going to, you know, shoot me down or, you know, crack that whip or whatever. And that is an aspect of God's nature, to rebuke his children, thankfully. I mean, because I've needed a lot of rebuke. But that's not the totality of who God is. And so to talk about what's a healthy fear or reverence of God, I think it's a great place to go.
Yeah, for me, if you had asked me this as a kid, a teenager, even early into my early 20s, fear of the Lord, I knew that aspect. My church taught that pretty clearly, right? And we sang songs of God's love, but we didn't really hear preaching on God's love. We didn't really hear any of that. What we heard was true Scripture, and I believe that fully. We just didn't hear the total part of it.
Did you have a healthy respect for the all-seeing eye?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, a lot of the teaching that I grew up with was kind of like what you guys are talking about. It's like, you're not going to get away with nothing. Because there's that all-seeing eye.
Yeah.
And you'll get squished like a bug.
Yeah, for years when I was a teenager, I would try to read and pray, you know, at night before I went to bed. Well, usually I'd fall asleep while I was praying, so that's not really good. You know, I mean, I would wake up fairly well condemned, in my own mind anyway. So I would try to read. Well, if I read most of Scripture when I was a teenager, I would again, fall asleep. So I thought, well, what could I read that would keep me awake? So where did I end up? I end up in Revelation. And so I start reading Revelation, to try to stay awake and to have some devotional time when I'm tired and should be in bed asleep. But then I would always end up in the passages, where it talks about that the immoral are going to burn in hell. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, that's me. That's me. I mean, and thankfully that did develop into a fear or a healthy respect of God, a reverence. That's really the word that we're looking at is reverence, awe. And it did create that. And thankfully, some people came along to help me understand that that's not the only part of God, so that I could go, okay, it's me, God, but I don't want it to be me. Can you help me with that?
And I think even if I think about our ministry and what we tend to focus on, I can't remember many times we've talked about the fear of God, right? Because I think most people have grown up with an inaccurate fear of God. And so, we focus more on the healing, the restoration, the stuff where God's really impacted our lives. But again, we don't want to be just one-sided. You want to talk about the totality of what the Scripture says. Right. And Robbie had shared something really incredly cool with me.
I bet it was.
He
tell us about it.
Yeah, I cannot wait.
What were the Hebrew letters that he used?
Nuff, said, Smith, Ned. I don't know. It was something. It was small words. But, he said something really cool, and I'm not poking fun at him. It was I do that a lot, but I'm not right now.
You're more poking fun at yourself.
I am. It was really incredibly cool. And he told me about it, and I'm like, that's awesome. And I can't remember anything he said. It was really cool. It came down to reverence and awe. And he went through the Hebrew letters, and I'm like, this is really cool, Robbie. And I did tell him that. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to forget that. Yeah, I can't remember.
Since then.
I've been trying for 2 days to remember what he said about it.
And you don't have his number. I mean, you couldn't call him.
Well, he's on vacation, and I thought, I'll let him be on vacation.
Okay.
Well, guys, this is a really important topic because it's absent in so much of our society today. When we look at what's going on in this country right now, it's evident that there's no fear of God in this place on the part of a lot of people. And I think if there were a healthy respect, awe, and fear of God, we'd see a different society in the make. And, to me, the expression OMG, I don't even want to say it other than the letters. It just makes me sick to hear people use that expression over things that are so common and so trivial. Like, OMG, that's the best pie I ever ate. That's not God.
No, and I think that
if he was the one that gave you the pie, okay, I get it. But I'm with you, Harold.
Well, yeah, I'd like to try that pie.
I would too. I'd like to have some God pie.
I'm a little hungry right now, but no, I do want to go ahead and get to a clip, and because I want to set this up a little bit. And this is Robbie's clip, and it's a really good clip. It's from the movie Patton. And I want to listen to just what he talks about this topic of fear. Yeah. And then equate that to a healthy fear of God.
You want to know why this outfit got kicked out of? Blind man could see it in a minute. They don't look like soldiers. They don't act like soldiers. Why should they be expected to fight like soldiers? About 15 minutes, we're going to start turning these boys into fanatics, razors. They'll lose their fear of the Germans. Only hope to God they never lose their fear of me.
As I thought about that, Robbie played that last week, I really thought about being a father of sons. I have 2 girls and 2 boys, and fortunately I had my girls first, and then I had my boys come through later. And I wanted to have my stuff together for both of them. But by the time I got to the boys, I understood this concept a little bit more, that as much as I want them to know me as dad, as somebody that loved them, I always wanted to keep them just a little bit afraid of me. Right, and that may sound counterintuitive, but you want them to go, oh my gosh, I don't want dad to know about this kind of thing, so I'm not going to do it. This healthy respect, this healthy fear. And, I always used to wrestle with my boys, and you guys laugh at me when my boys are around because they're both bigger than me now, and they beat the snot out of me. They punch me and poke me and all that, and I have fun with them. But I've always told them since they were real little, I've taught you everything you know, but I've never taught you everything I know. Now, since they don't typically listen to the show, they're not going to realize That went away a long time ago. I've taught him everything I've known well long ago.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah,
Spoiler alert.
But I still want him to believe I got a little something held back, that even when I'm old and even more out of shape, I could still take him down if I had to. I want him to have that fear anyway, right? But when you think of God, you want... I've transitioned over time that, my whole concept of God has just been about this loving Father, because it was missing for so long. Mm-hmm. But I think if I'm not careful, I'm going to miss a healthy fear of God. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of Christians that may struggle with that, it's hard to find that balancing act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How can I have
both?
I
think we could be guilty. I mean, we honestly could be guilty of focusing too much on one aspect of God's personality. And if I'm guilty of it, I'd rather be guilty of focusing too much on His grace and on His love as a father and His Father's heart and all of that. But I hope that our listeners do know that, as a father, there is some righteous indignation at times as a father. My son came up the other day to help me and my grandson wire our house that we're building. We're building a house, and so he came up to just help us pull wire and all that stuff. And so he and my grandson are talking, and they're cutting up, and something came up, and he thought back to a time in the late 90s, early 2000s, and Derek, my son, said to my grandson, "Yeah, you just better be glad you didn't know the 2003 through 2006 Darren."
Yeah.
Pawpaw Darren. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Oh, you were a scary dude back then, Dad. You were a scary dude." Because my grandson was saying, no, I'm scared of Pawpaw now, to a certain extent. And Derek was like, no, you got it. So easy compared to, and I was like, "Really? Was it that bad?" And he goes, "Oh, Dad, you were rough, And so, I don't want to be that guy, and I don't want God to be that God. Right. But He has the right to be, right. If He chooses. And He would be doing it in His sovereignty and His knowledge and even in His wanting the best for me if He were. Mm-hmm. And so I want our listeners to hear that God is still God, and He can still choose any way He wants to choose that is within His own righteousness. He can't violate His own righteousness. Right. But within that, He can be a lot of things that I consider scary, and He has been.
And He's needed to be.
Yeah.
And time will only prove that out when you look back and you say, wow, I really needed God to be that way with me here. Mm-hmm. Or to maybe not be right where I needed Him, because He was there and I didn't realize it. And we'll come back, we'll talk more about that and talk about this whole concept. But right now, while we're going into break, I want you to consider going to masculinejourney.org, registering for the upcoming boot camp coming up November 10th, is it?
The 11th through the 15th.
11th through 15th, that week, Thursday through Sunday. Mm-hmm. We'll have the dates when we come back.
November 11th through 15th.
11th through 15th. Go register now. We'd love to see you there. God's got some incredible things. Hi, this is Sam with Masculine Journey. I'm here with my son Eli. We're going to talk about ways that you can help support the ministry. One way, you can go to smile.amazon.com. Go to smile.amazon.com. There's information on our website there on how to do that.
You can go to facebook.com and click the donate button, or you can go to masculinejourney.org and find the donate button. masculinejourney.org.
Or if you want to mail something in, mail it to P.O. Box 550, Kernersville, North Carolina, 27285.
Now what do we do?
Just be yourselves.
Where are you going?
I'm going to pick a fight.
If it feels like every day is picking a fight, then you might want to come listen to The Masculine Journey and find out why we use clips like these to illustrate the story God is telling in the lives of men today. The truth is, God designed you to pick a fight, but which fights do we pick? Well, grab your gear and come on a quest.
Every Saturday at noon. And now The Masculine Journey After Hours podcast. Masculine Journey Radio.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, life, hope, meaning, and joy.
Andy, that was your bump.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, it was. There's not a whole lot of songs out there.
You were fearful that I was going to say something. I was just making a statement that was your pop. So thank you for that.
If your face, I mean, if your face, if the listeners could just see your face.
I could hear it in your voice pretty clearly, yeah. No, but thank you. Thank you for that, Bob.
Anytime.
As we're going into break, we're just talking a little bit, and I think as a ministry, we focus on God's grace, healing, restoration. Because it's been a game changer for us, right? And in our lives, that's what brings us all together. That's why we do the boot camps. That's what God does at the boot camps. Is He shows that side of Him, right?
Yeah,
He shows
in a huge way.
In a huge way. And I think the reason that He does, and the reason it's so prominent for us, is society out there knows what it means to have a father that's absent. Knows what it means to have a father that's checked out, the father that's abusive. That's not the fear that we're talking about. That's not the fear Scripture's talking about. I'm not afraid.
Not a scary God.
Not a scary God. Not an absent God. Not a, what's God going to beat me down with today?
Yeah.
Is God in a bad mood?
Yeah.
Bipolar,
schizophrenic God. That's what it's these two extremes of Him, and we act like that He can't have both of those attributes or characteristics. And I think the fear, I think there's a definition of fear that we think of the fear that we experience when we're actually afraid of something. And I don't think that's what He intends it to be. I mean, if you're trying to get to that New Testament God who we call Abba Father, if we're sitting there in a terrorized fear, and you guys mentioned it earlier, but we're never going to be able to approach a God and sit on Papa's lap and say Abba Father if we're totally freaked out in fear over Him, right?
Right, and that's been a huge part. I mean, that's been very close to your heart over the last few years. But I want to ask you a question. When you've been at boot camps before, or you were listening to the radio show before, and were there times when God or something that somebody said from the stage was very convicting?
Yeah, of course, yes.
You want to tell us about all those times?
So Andy, we're keeping track.
No, probably a lot of them. I mean, everything is given in grace in the boot camps, obviously. Not a lot of condemnation, but yet conviction where you realize that you weren't walking in a way, and it could even be in that you weren't really experiencing God's love in the way that you should. There's a conviction that comes with that says, you can draw close to this God. You can trust Him, whereas you didn't feel like you could before boot camp.
And that was my point, is that, even though we talk about grace and we talk about God as Father and as a wonderful Father all the time, even a wonderful Father will convict you of sin, righteousness, and judgment at times, or other things. Mine did. I had a phenomenal Father who was the epitome of grace and mercy. But let me tell you, He got my attention at times. Now, I was never afraid of my Father, literally. I never was afraid of Him, but I had a deep respect for Him, and that's what we're talking about. If you're afraid, people who are afraid, Jim, do really ugly things and bad things. I mean, as a police officer, you probably saw a lot of bad behavior when people were afraid.
No, as a counselor, you probably see that too.
Well, all of the above.
Yeah.
Bullies, for the most part, are terrified. So they're basically wearing the mask of, I'm tough and I can take this on. Mm-hmm. When you were talking earlier, and I wasn't going to get up, but I was offered the microphone, all of you that were speaking earlier grew up in churches where the fear was pushed. Mm-hmm. I did not. I was a reasonably liberal Presbyterian growing up.
We thought there was something there.
Yeah,
we weren't sure
and it's amazing that I made it to this show because I had to learn. But in that, I also had a wonderful Father, and I've said that before. But I was scared of God, even though I didn't hear that when I was young, because I'd read the Bible and see things, wow, I don't want to make Him mad. Mm-hmm. But I had such a great example in my father. I knew I was unconditionally loved, and I knew I wasn't going to get away with
stuff. And it became my biggest motivation. It wasn't that I quit doing bad things. I just didn't want to get caught, because my biggest motivation was not to disappoint my father. And I've carried that through to God. Now, we talked about fear. I think Yare or something similar, that's the word. And I'm not going to beat it up like Robbie would, but that goes everywhere from extreme terror to a place where you are walking alongside in a respectful attitude. Mm-hmm. In Hebrew, it's got to be context. And that's kind of the nice thing about Hebrew, because God is all of the above. Mm-hmm. And walking beside him with that healthy respect is major.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to have been one of the ones on the wrong side of the Red Sea. I think they had different healthy respects for God's.
Well, even saying that, we talk about God as this wonderful father figure, and yet, if he appeared in a physical manifestation here in the studio right now, I have no doubt in my mind that every single one of us would both welcome that and in reverence and awe be a little fearful, right? I mean, not is he going to zap me fearful, but oh my,
blown out of the water.
Who am I to be in the presence of this, that sort of reverence, that sort of awe? And I think, that is in our soul. We know that's reality. We know that we are that much less than.
That's a word that society has really co-opted that doesn't belong. Awesome.
Yeah, you're
that's
awesome,
so awesome.
Jim.
You scored 2 points and shooting that basket. Awesome.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
That's an awesome point, Jim.
Awesome is
it is an awesome point.
That healthy respect, fear of God. And that's where I want to use the word. If I'm not talking too much, or if I'm talking too much, cut me off. But one of the most difficult times in my life, my father was a big guy too. He was 6'4". He was a Navy boxer. He was a dentist, so after he punched you in the mouth, it could fix you. But I always had a healthy respect/fear of any sort of physical confrontation with my father. It was just never even something that I could wrap my mind around. And one of the biggest blows I took when he was in his 70s was I went to hug him and I realized how frail he was. Mm-hmm. But I still had that same level of respect and awe of my father.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just lost my total train of thought. God as Father, for me, is one that I think what makes me fearful is knowing he knows everything. He knows the thoughts that I really have sometimes. He knows the thoughts of what I was thinking about the driver in front of me on my way over here. It was going at least 15 or 20 miles under the speed limit. I wasn't real happy about that. Right, and
I don't think God was happy about it either.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think he was co-opted. He was my co-pilot. So, he knows all those things. Right, and I think when history's kind of showed me, Andy, when you talk about his conviction, yes, he speaks truth, but it's in such a loving way. Mm-hmm. Does it sting? Yes, because it's true, but it doesn't hurt. Mm-hmm. It doesn't wound me.
Yeah, hurt. Yes, might hurt.
Wound. It doesn't wound me. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, it's perfect. That's a wonderful way of describing it. That it is painful when somebody you love and care for, somebody you respect. My wife says, "Darren, you hurt me." Well, that hurts. She's not trying to wound my heart. Mm-hmm. She's trying to speak truth to me, and God is very much like that, and He can do it with such grace and love and care that I can't. When you hurt me, I'm going to tell you hurt me, but I'm probably going to try to get a jab in at the same time.
Yeah.
You hurt me, therefore I hope this hurts you.
Yeah.
Type of thing. And I, unfortunately, I think I'm too much like that at times, and wished I could be, more like my father.
And then King James, that'd be hurteth.
Hurteth, yes. You hurtest me.
You would really stick with the King James part. We
could
do that. Yeah, I think that God has always come at me in a way that's, God is truth. And the truth can hurt, as you were just saying.
Yep.
But he's never done it in a way that I'm afraid to approach him.
Yep.
There was years that I was afraid to ask him what he thought of me.
Mm.
Because I was afraid he'd think what I thought of me.
Right, yeah, right.
Or what other people had told me about me.
Yeah.
But when I actually asked him, it was not that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was something totally different. It was loving and it was gracious. And it was truth that I didn't have the eyes yet to see. And so there's that aspect of God, too, that the enemy and the world wants you to be afraid of. And that's not something to be fearful of God about. It's the awe and the respect and the awesomeness of him and what he can do.
Yep.
There's that scripture, I think is it in Job? Jim, you could probably tell me, or Darren, where he talks about, can you make it rain?
Yeah.
Yeah. In Job.
Yeah. And it's like,
where were you when I set the foundations of the earth, right?
Yeah. I mean, just go look at the Grand Canyon, or go someplace like that and say, wow, look at the mountain range in Colorado or here, just go on the Blue Ridge Parkway.
Yep.
And you can't help but just feel this reverence.
Majesty.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah. That's why I love the Rockies so much.
Yeah.
Because when I go there, the overwhelming thought is God is so big.
Yep.
And I am so small. And I love that he's that big, that he can take care of me.
We'd like for you to join us for the After Hours broadcast we'll be doing. If you listen to us on the radio, you can go pick that up at iHeartRadio, at Spotify, at Apple, iTunes.
Spreaker, bunch of
just
different
about
ones.
any place you can get a podcast, and hopefully soon on Pandora. That'll be coming up in the next month or so. You can pick it up there. But go listen to the After Hours. We're going to dig into this topic deeper, share more of our stories, hear from some of the other guys in the room, and find out how their concept of the fear of God has changed over time. But first, while you're waiting, go to masculinejourney.org, register for the upcoming boot camp coming up the 11th through the 15th of November. Go register now. I promise you spots will fill quickly. We'll see you next week.
This is the Truth Network.